Continuing in Book 1, Chapter 29, Verse 13. The worldliness of man is his true poison, while real poison is no poison to him. It is the poison of worldliness that destroys his future life, while real poison is only locally injurious to him. Neither pleasure nor pain nor friends nor relatives, not even life and death, can bind a man that has received the light of truth. O Brahman, the best of the learned, teach me the art of the mysteries of past and future. Teach me so that I may soon become like one devoid of grief and fear and worldly troubles, so that I may have the light of truth beaming upon me. The forest of ignorance is laid over with the snare of desire. It is full of the thorns of misery, and it is the dreadful seat of destruction and the danger of repeated births. I would suffer myself to put under the jaws of death with his rows of saw-like teeth, but I cannot bear the deadly pains of worldly cares and anxieties. It is a gloomy error in the world to think, I have this and have not the other. It serves to toss our minds about like a gust of wind disperses dust. It is the thread of greed that links together all living beings like a garland of pearls. The mind serves to twirl this chain, but pure consciousness sits quietly, observing its rotation. I, who am devoid of desires, would like to break this ornamental chain of worldliness that hangs about me like a deadly serpent, like a lion tears apart a net. O most learned sage, scatter the mist that has clouded the forest of my heart. By the light of true knowledge, scatter the darkness that has overcast my mind. There is no anxieties, O sage, which cannot be put to an end by the company of good-minded men. The darkness of night is dispelled by moonbeams. Life is as fickle as a drop of water in a mass of clouds blown by the winds. Our enjoyments are as unsteady as lightning flashing in the clouds. The pleasures of youth are as slippery as water. With these reflections in my mind, I have subdued them all under the province of peace and tranquility. Chapter 30. Self-disparagement. Rama speaking. Seeing the world swallowed up in the abyss of hundreds of rising dangers and difficulties, my mind is immersed in a mire of anxieties. My mind wanders everywhere, and I am struck with fear at everything. My limbs shake with fear like the leaves of a withered tree. My mind is bewildered by impatience for its lack of true contentment, just as a young woman alone in a desert is afraid without her strong-handed husband. The thoughts of my mind are entangled in my desire for worldly enjoyments, like stags caught in a pit covered with grass. The senses of an unreasonable man are always running astray to the strong and never turning to the right way. The eyes of a blind man lead him to fall into a pit. Human thoughts are linked to the animal soul like consorts to their lords. They can neither sit idly nor ramble at liberty, but must remain as wives under the control of their husband. My patience is almost worn out, like that of a vine under winter frost. It is decayed, and neither lives nor perishes at once. Our minds are partly settled on worldly things and partly fixed on their giver. This divided state of the mind is called its half-waking condition. My mind is in a state of suspense, being unable to ascertain the real nature of my soul. I am like one in the dark who sees a tree stump in the distance and is deceived to think it is a human figure. Our minds are naturally fickle and wandering all about the earth. They cannot forsake their restlessness, as the vital airs cannot exist without being in motion. Tell me, O sage, what state of life is dignified above others, is not associated with troubles, is unqualified by the conditions of humanity, is apart from errors, and in which grief is unknown. How have Janaka and other good men, conspicuous for their ceremonious acts and distinguished for their good conduct, acquired their excellence? O source of my honor, how can a man be cleansed who has smeared the dirt of worldliness all over his body? Tell me, what is the knowledge by which the serpents of worldliness can be freed from their worldly crookedness and become straight in their conduct? Tell me how the foulness of my heart, soiled by errors and tainted with evil, like a lake disturbed by elephants and polluted with dirt, can regain its clarity. How is it possible for someone engaged in worldly affairs to be untainted with his blemishes and remain as pure and intact as a drop of water on a lotus leaf? How can one attain excellence by dealing with others as with himself, regarding others' property to be like straw and remaining aloof from love? Who is that great man that has crossed the great ocean of the world, whose exemplary conduct exempts one from misery? What is the best of things that ought to be pursued? And what fruit is worth obtaining? Which is the best course of life in this inconsistent world? Tell me how I can have knowledge of past and future events of the world and the nature of the unsteady works of its Creator. Do so that my mind, which is like the moon in the sky of my heart, may be cleared of its impurities. Tell me what is most delectable to the mind, and what is most abominable, and how this fickle and inconstant mind may become fixed like a rock. Tell me, what is the holy charm that can remove this choleric pain of worldliness, attended with numberless troubles? Tell me, how can I entertain the blossoms of the tree of heavenly happiness within my heart that sheds the coolness of full moonbeams. O you good men who are present here and learned in divine knowledge, teach me, so that I may obtain the fullness of my heart and may not come to grief and sorrow any more. My mind is devoid of that tranquility which results chiefly from holy happiness. My mind is perplexed with endless doubts that disturb my peace like dogs molest smaller animals in the desert. Chapter 31, Rama's questions. Ram said, I have no trust in the durability of life, which is as transient as a drop of water on the edge of a shaking leaf on a lofty tree, and as short as the cusp of the moon on Shiva's forehead. I have no faith in the durability of life, which is transient as the swelling in the pouch of a frog as it croaks in the meadow. I have no trust in the company of friends, which is as dangerous as the treacherous traps of hunters. What can we do under the misty cloud of errors that raise our tempestuous desires, flashing forth in lightning bolts of ambition and bursting out in the thunderclap of selfishness? How shall we save ourselves from the temptations of our desires that dance around us like peacocks? How shall we save ourselves from the bustle of the world that breaks in on us as thickly as the blossoms of the kerchief plant? How can we fly from the clutches of cruel fate, who, like a cat, in the twinkling of an eye, suddenly springs upon his prey and kills the living as if they were poor mice? To what expedient, what course, what reflections, and what refuge must we have recourse in order to avoid the unknown tracks of future lives? There is nothing so trifling in this earth below or in the heavens above, which you gifted men cannot raise to consequence. How can one relish this accursed, troublesome, and vapid world, unless he is infatuated by ignorance? How can one? It is the fusion of desires that produces the milky beverage of contentment and fills the heart with delights like spring adorns it with flowers. Tell me, O sage, how the mist of our desires, which darkens the moon of our intellects, is to be dispelled from our minds to make it shine forth in its full brightness. How are we to deal with this wilderness of the world, knowing well that it is destructive both of our present and future interests? Who is there who moves about in this ocean of the earth, and who is not buffeted by the waves of his passions and diseases, and by the currents of his enjoyments and prosperity? Tell me, O best of sages, how one who has fallen into the furnace of this earth may escape unburned like mercury. How can one be rid of the world when it is impossible for him to avoid dealing with it in the same manner as it is impossible for aquatic animals to live without their native element? Even our good deeds are not without affection and hatred, pleasure and pain. Just like no flame is unaccompanied by its power of burning. Without reasoning, it is impossible to restrain the mind from thinking on worldly matters. So therefore, deign to communicate to me the dictates of sound reason for my guidance. Give me the best instruction for warding off miseries, either by confronting or renouncing the affairs of life. Tell me about the man of enlightened understanding who attacks the highest state of holiness and tranquility of his mind, and the deeds and manner by which he achieved the same. Tell me, good sage, how the ancient saints fled out of the reach of misery, so that I may learn the same to suppress my false conceptions. Or, if there be no such knowledge in existence, or if there is, whether it is to be kept secret from me. Should I fail to attain the highest state of tranquility, then I must remain inactive and avoid my sense of egoism altogether. I will refrain from eating and drinking even water, and from clothing myself. I will cease from all my actions of bathing and making my offerings, as also from my diet and the like. I will attend to no duty, nor care about prosperity or calamity. I will be free from all desires except that of the abandonment of this body. I must remain aloof from all fears, sympathies, selfish feeling and emulation, and continue to sit quietly as a figure in painting. I will gradually do away with the inspiration and respiration of my breath and outward sensations until I part with this trifle, the seat of all troubles, this so-called body. I do not belong to this body, nor does it belong to me, nor is anything else mine. I shall be null and void like a lamp without oil, and abandon everything to do with this body. Valmiki said. Then Rama, who was as lovely as the moon and whose mind was well filled with reasoning, became silent before the assemblage of eminent men, like a peacock in awe ceases its screaming before gathering clouds. So we've had a very lovely exposition of the divine karmic traces that create the human physiology. Why has the human physiology been created? Well, it's due to pragyaprad. Pragyaprad is the mistake of the intellect. At one point in the eternity of things, there was wholeness. There was unity, there was yoga, there was oneness. Then there was the sense or the idea of separation. The idea of separation is the mistake of the intellect. And this idea of separation formed like a bubble deep in the ocean, spontaneously forming like a bubble deep in the ocean, and this bubble of separation then rose through the ocean and burst out onto the surface. And the jiva was born. Little bit of something that is wholeness became existent. And so the pure consciousness having sensed this separation embarked on a project to heal the separation. And that is the whole journey of self-realization. Chapter 32, Praise for Rama's Speech. Valmiki said, when Prince Ram concluded his speech, calculated to remove all ignorance from the mind, all men in the assembly had their eyes beaming with wonder. The hairs on their bodies stood erect and pierced through their garments, as if wishing to hear the speech. For a moment, after their stoic detachment and in their eagerness, the assembly seemed to have lost their worldly desires and be rolling in the sea of nectar. The audience remained motionless, like figures in a painting, enraptured with internal delight, having heard the sweet words of fortunate Rama. There were Vasishta and Vishwamitra with other sages, and Prime Minister Jayanta and other royal counselors then seated in that assembly. There were also King Dasaratha and his subordinate king, citizens and foreign delegates, chieftains and princes, together with Brahmins and learned men, men learned in the Vedas and divine knowledge. These, accompanied by their friends and allies, with birds in their cages and royal antelopes and steeds about the palace, had listened to Rama with fixed and mute attention. Likewise, Queen Kausalya and other ladies, adorned with their best jewels, were seated at the windows, all mute and motionless. Besides these, the birds on the trees and vines of the princely pleasure garden were listening to Ram without fluttering their wings or making any motion or sound. Also present were masters and aerial beings, tribes of celestial musicians, Gandharvas and Kinnaras, together with Narada, Vyasa, and Ulapa, the lords of the sages. There were also some of the gods and chiefs of gods, demigods, Vidyadharas, and the divine Cobras, Nagas, who heard Ram's speech, full of meaning and clarity. Ram, his eyes beautiful as lotuses, his face lovely as the moon, the star in the sky of Raghu's family, held his silence. From heaven, divine beings showered flowers upon him with loud cheers and blessings. People in the assembly were delighted with the sweet scent and beauty of these flowers from paradise filled with humming bees. When blown into the air by the breeze of heaven, those flowers appeared like clusters of stars, which after their fall brightened the ground with their beauty like the beaming smiles of heavenly maids. They appeared like raindrops falling from clouds ablaze with the light of silent lightning and scattering like balls of fresh butter. They also resembled particles of snowballs, like the beads of a necklace made of pearls, like beams of moonlight, like small waves in a sea of milk, or like drops of ice cream. Flowers were carried by the loose and sweet winds of heaven. Some lotuses with long filaments, attended by clusters of bees humming and flying about them. Among them were heaps of Ketaki, Kairava, Kunda, and blue lotus flowers falling and shining brightly. These flowers covered the court hall, the roofs of houses and their courtyards. Men and women in the city raised their head to behold them falling. The sky remained quite unclouded as flowers fell constantly from above. A sight like this, never before seen, struck people with wonder. The shower of flowers fell for a quarter of an hour, but the masters from whose hands they fell were unseen for a while. When the falling of showers ceased, after the assembly was covered with them, they heard the following words from the divine beings in the sky. We have been unraveling everywhere in bodies as spiritual masters, siddhas, from the beginning of creation, but nowhere have we ever heard any speech as sweet as this. Even the gods such as ourselves have never heard such a magnanimous speech of detachment as Ram, the moon of Raghu's race, has just spoken now. We account ourselves truly blessed to have heard it today, this highly charming and wonderful speech from the mouth of Ram himself. Indeed, we are awakened and edified by attending diligently to Rama's truly excellent speech on the ambrosial bliss of asceticism and leading to the highest joy of men. Chapter 33. Association of Celestial and Earthly Beings. The spiritual masters, Siddha said, it behooves us to hear the decision of the great sages in reply to the holy sermon delivered by the chief of Raghu's race. Come forward, you great chiefs of sages, you Narada, Vyasa, Ulaha, and all you other great sages, and be ready. Let us descend to the full open court of Dasaratha, which is as bright as gold and free from stain, like bees alighting on the immaculate golden lotus. Valmiki said, so saying, the whole company of divine sages left their celestial abode for that court. There Narada, the chief of sages, sat foremost, playing on his lute. In the midst was Vyasa, with his dark blue complexion resembling a rainy cloud. Moreover, the court was adorned with the presence of the chief sages, Bhrigu, Angiras, Pulasta, and others, with Chayavana, Udalaka, Ushira, Saraloman, and many more with them. Their deerskin garments hung loosely as they embraced one another. Their rudraksha beads moved in one hand and their water pots shook in the other. Their bodies shed a luster in the royal assembly hall, resembling the yellow starlight, like the beams of so many blazing suns upon one another. They appeared like a shower of moonbeams, or like a halo about the full moon, or like a circle about the orb of the sun out of its season. They looked like a circlet of gems of varied colors, or like a necklace of pearls of great luster. At the place where he sat, Vyasa appeared to be like a dark cloud amidst the stars. Narada on his seat seemed like the white orb of the moon among stars. Here, Pulastya shone like Indra among the gods, and there Angira blazed like the sun amidst heavenly bodies. On seeing the body of masters descending from the sky to the earth, the entire court of King Dasaratha rose up to greet them. There was a mixed assemblage of the celestial and earthly sages whose commingled glory spread a luster to the 10 sides of the court. Some of them held bamboo sticks in their hands, and others had lotuses in theirs. Some had sacred grass in their crest, while others had inserted some gems in the braids of their hair. Some had matted and tawny brown hairs on their heads, and others wore garlands of flowers on theirs. Some had strings of beads for their bracelets, and others wore wristlets made of jasmine flowers. Some were clothed in tatters, and some wore garments made of bark, while yet others wore clothes of silk. Some were girt with girdles of grass and skin about their waist, and others wore waistbands with pendant strings of pearl. Vasishtha and Vishwamitra bowed, honored the sages one by one with respectful offerings, water, and courteous address. The body of the celestials also honored Vasishtha and Vishwamitra in their turn with water and offering worthy of them and with polite speeches. The king also honored the gods and the body of the spiritual masters who returned, greeted the monarch with inquiries about his welfare. Then the heavenly and earthly sages and saints exchanged greetings with one another with cordial welcomes and gestures, and were all seated afterwards on seats made of kushagrass. They next honored Rama, who lay bowing before them with gentle words and congratulations, accompanied with offerings of flowers. Seated in that assembly were the sages Vishwamitra, Vashishta, Vamadeva, and the ministers of state. Also there were Narada and the son of Brahma, Vyasa, the greatest of sages, Marichi, Durvasa, and Angira. Kratu, Pulastya, Pulaha, Saralama, the great sage Vatsatyana, Bharadvaja, and Valmiki, the great bard and sage, were all there, as were Udalaka, Richika, Sarjati, as well as Chayavana. These and many others, versed in the various branches of the Vedas, knowing all things worth knowing, were the leading members of that assembly. Then Narada and others joined with Vishwamitra and Vashishta in addressing Rama, who was sitting silent, his face turned downwards. They said, "We admire the prince's blessed and graceful speech, dignified with the spirit of detachment that breathes through the whole of it. It is full of thought. It is perspicuous, elegant, clear, dignified, sweet, and worthy of noble-minded men by its lucid style and lack of fault. Who is not struck with admiration at Rama's speech? It expresses his thoughts well, correct in its diction, plain, sweet, and agreeable to all. It is rare to find one man among the 100 who is so eloquent, combining dignity and force with clarity and sweetness, such that they command the admiration of all. Who has such a clear head as our Prince? A head that is penetrating as the best pointed arrow, and as fruitful and beautiful as a creeping vine plant. He is truly a man whose intellectual light, like that of Ram, burns like the flame of a lamp within himself and enlightens all about him. Man's blood, flesh, and bones serve as machines to supply him with sensations of external objects, but there is no intelligence in them. Life and death, old age and troubles repeatedly overtake every man, but they are beasts who are so infatuated that they never think of these. There is scarcely any man to be seen who has an understanding as clear as Ram, who can use the past to judge the future. Ram is the most excellent, admirable, useful, and well-shaped person among men, like the mango tree among the many useful plants. It is only that we see a man of Ram's age having acquired so much experience of the world, and who is so extraordinarily mature in understanding. In every place there are many trees found growing that are beautiful to see, easy to climb, and abundant in flowers and leaves. But there is no tree of paradise growing on earth. In every forest, trees grow with good flowers and leaves, but the extraordinary and fair-clothed tree is not always to be found. Ram has displayed the wonder of his knowledge, like the moon displays her cooling beams, and good trees their clusters of blossoms, and like flowers diffuse their fragrance all about. It is very difficult to get the essence of true knowledge in this cursed world, constructed by the uncontrollable and dominant predestination of our past. Those who are reckoned the best of men and leaders of the good, who try their best to gain the essence of truth, and whose mind are fixed on glory as their best treasure. We do not see anyone in all this world equal to Ram in discrimination and magnanimity, nor shall there be one like him in the future. This is our firm conviction. If this speech of Ram, which has filled everyone here with admiration, fails to get a reply to the satisfaction of Rama's mind, it is certain that all of us here must pass for senseless sages. So what has just occurred here is very interesting. What we're seeing is when there can be an influence in physical 3D Earth that is in total alignment with the divine karmic traces, it creates such an influence throughout the entire universe that there appears a bubble of Satyuga. In Satyuga, it was common for the celestial being to be in the three-dimensional physical universe, walking about with our Sahasraha Sirsha Brahma meditation. We're creating what is called the emergence event. That emergence event will literally attract all the celestials to once again be found walking among us in physical 3D Earth. So that's very interesting that we have a reminder of our mission here. And we'll know we have been successful when this occurs. Not a story of fantasy. This is something that is going to happen and that has happened in the past. And we're here to enjoy. So now we move on to book 2. And here we're going to get the answer to all of Ram's many questions. And we'll leave that to begin tomorrow. Jai Gurudev.